Do you find yourself lost in the gym or want just a little bit more advice on how to program? In this video, we're going to take a look at two very effective, very common programming and progression models and show you how to implement them. The first one is going to be the minimum effective volume progression model all the way up to the maximum recoverable volume. This has been popularized by Mike Israetel, and it's a really, really effective method if you're not quite sure if you're pushing hard enough in the gym or when you need to deload, because this method of training solves a lot of these problems for you. Generally, how you want to start your training block out is by estimating or finding your minimum effective volume. This is just simply the least amount of training that you need to cause gains. There are three proxy measures for this that can tell you if you're getting in the ballpark. Once you go in and start doing sets, if you get a good muscle pump, that swelling, stiff feeling in the muscle, if you get a disruption feeling or a general perception of weakness in the target muscle, and if you're getting soreness in the next couple of days. All three of these markers kind of put together tell you very likely are at least at your minimum effective volume, and you know you have a good starting point. So put simply, go into the gym, do a couple sets till you get a good amount of pump and weakness and disruption, and that might be your starting point for that muscle group. These sets that you're doing in your first week are likely going to want to be around 3 and 4 repetitions from failure. So you could have done 4 more reps before achieving total muscular failure. That would be 4 reps from failure as an example. Each week, your repetitions in reserve is going to decrease 1. You're going to achieve this by either adding load to the bar or reps where it makes sense. And depending on how much pump, disruption, and soreness you achieve, you're going to add between 1 and 3 sets per muscle group per week. Eventually, week in and week out, following this model, you'll reach your maximum recoverable volume, which is the most amount of volume you can still do and still recover. After you've reached this point, as you continue to progress, you're eventually going to run into a session or 2 sessions in a row where you can't match or beat your previous week's performance. Again, looking at your previous week's performance is very, very valuable because each week we're going to be either adding load or adding reps. Eventually, you're not going to be able to add load or add reps. Once this occurs 2 times in a row, you know you're training beyond your ability to recover, and this is a good indicator that you need to deload. In this specific methodology of training, oftentimes deloads need to be a little bit more holistic, covering out most of the body, simply because we are doing a functional overreaching pattern in this. So you might find a recovery half week where you're doing like 3 to 4 days with light training in the gym, up to a full week off. The literature is kind of contesting that at this moment. At the very least, a recovery half week is an awesome option. This model, again, is really, really beneficial if you're not quite sure if you're pushing yourself hard enough in the gym, because it kind of automatically fixes that for you because you have to add load every single week and you eventually go to failure. Next is going to be the dual progression model, and this is a little bit more simple and yet more complicated at the same time, and I'll kind of dive into that for you. I'm going to start roughly at your estimated maximum adaptive volume, or that place at which you're really hammering the muscle and you're building a ton of muscle. If you're looking back at the previous model, this occurs somewhere in the middle between MEV and MRV. So if you can imagine it, somewhere right around here. Once you've found that volume where you really get a lot of stimulus and a decent amount of fatigue, but not too much, that's where this training cycle generally starts. You're going to select your rep range. Let's, in this instance, say 8 to 12, and you're going to set your RIR at roughly 2 to 1, somewhere in there. How you progress in this methodology of training is simply adding repetitions week to week as you get adaptations until you start to outgrow your rep range. Once you've outgrown your rep range, then you can consider adding load, and you kind of flow chart repeat this as possible. By the sheer fact that you're able to add reps week in and week out, this shows that your volume is going to be good. If you're not able to add reps to most lifts week in and week out, you're either underdoing it in volume or comically overdoing it in volume, and you would probably know if you were overdoing it in volume. So if you do find yourself not able to add reps, consider bumping sets a small amount, like again, 1 to 3 sets per muscle group per week. But for the most part, total set count is going to stay somewhat similar in this model. One particular benefit of this methodology of training is it allows muscle group specific deloads. So you're slamming volume, you're going week in, week out, adding reps, and then you notice some joint and connective tissue issues, let's say in your bicep. You can pull back on biceps and do a muscle group specific deload. What that looks like is taking that whole session off of biceps, or taking that session plus the next 1 to 2 sessions off of biceps. And then you're able to bring it right back into the program and keep on firing. This methodology of training requires the athlete to be really, really in tune with their body, and sometimes can be a little bit more complicated. So if you have someone that's a little bit newer, potentially doing the more flow chart model of the previous progression model can be beneficial. Whereas if you want to crank out a ton of volume and really optimize some things, this option might be beneficial. Though the main contentious point between these two progression models is how they utilize deloads, and we do need a lot more literature on that. Lastly, on the dual progression model, if you have multiple muscle groups underperforming in sequential sessions in a row, consider doing, again, a full body deload because your systemic fatigue is likely so high.